So let's talk about the latest revelation of China's and Russia's moonbase plans that have recently been revealed with exact dates and timelines. How are they going to do this? And should the US be worried? Will China be able to establish a human presence on the moon before the US with their Artemis program? And China's aggressive space station and moonbase plans prompted the NASA administrator to ask for more funding for the human lander of the Artemis program. Will he get the funding? And then we of course also have to talk about China's success with their new space station. That's a space politics heavy episode this time, so stay tuned. So on June 16th, Chinese and Russian space officials revealed their plans for a lunar research station at the Global Space Exploration Conference in St. Petersburg, Russia. They called their future moonbase the International Lunar Research Station ILRS. And now we know the exact dates and timelines, and we have to say they are absolutely not as ambitious as we would have thought. Wow, that was quite anticlimactic. Yes, indeed, according to the latest revelations, we can expect the ILRS to start to be built as late as 2031. Before that, we'll have lots of unmanned probes sent there. China will send the Chang'e 4 to 7 missions, and Russia will reactivate the Soviet-era Luna probes and will send Luna 25, 26 and 27 to the moon. This all will happen in phase 1 from 2021 to 2025. We can see that the rockets that will be used in this phase are the current Chinese Long March 5 and the Russian Soyuz 2 rockets. The next phase then begins in 2026 and lasts until 2030, according to this slide from the conference. However, it seems as if no manned landings are planned for this entire time. Only technology verification of the command center of the moonbase, then a lunar sample return mission, and massive cargo delivery. Whatever cargo that will be is left unspecified. Maybe the first habitat module of the station. In that time, Chang'e 8 and Luna 28 will also soft land on the moon. And then in 2030, start of joint operations. Also very vague wording here. It only gets interesting from 2031 onwards, because as we understand this slide here, this is actually where the ILRS moonbase will actually be built. The missions for constructing the moonbase will be called ILRS 1 to 5, and they will all involve heavy lift rockets. On the Chinese side, the Tiangong 9 or Long March 9, and on the Russian side, the Angara heavy lift rocket. Both rockets currently do not exist yet, although the Chinese are already testing some components of their future heavy lift rocket. The objectives here are written in a lot of tech fluff talk, but what this actually means is that they will build a moon base on the ground with habitat modules, energy creation systems, and in situ resource utilization. This means harvesting resources on the moon such as water ice or lunar regolith, and then extracting valuable gases or minerals from these resources such as oxygen, hydrogen, or even methane. These can be used for life support systems or to create rocket propellant. And as we read this, they also want to build a gateway-style space station that is going to orbit the moon. And then only in 2036, yes, you have heard that right, in 2036, 15 years from now, do we actually read something about human landings. So as we read this, from 2030 to 2035, we will only have cargo deliveries and deployment of the modules of their ground moonbase and their orbit moonbase, and then only in 2036 will the first humans arrive to actually conduct research, explore the moon, and live in that moonbase. This moonbase then can be expanded as they write. As for the location, some possible locations were shown, but we have to say that the most likely one is the one called Amundsen crater near the lunar South Pole. Everything else doesn't make sense for a human presence because of the long 28-day lunar night. Near the South Pole, the sun is super low on the horizon, but actually never really sets. Plus, you also have a lot of water ice there. But you see, the timeline is surprisingly unambitious. First landings in 2036? That is certainly not an aggressive timeline. We would have hoped that China and Russia would put in a bit more effort into building a moon base, to put the US under more pressure, but this way the pressure is surprisingly low. The US will thus very likely have a human presence on the moon long before China or Russia. Most likely with SpaceX, of course, as SpaceX has been chosen to be the main landing system of America's Artemis program, which will foresee humans returning to the moon in the 2020s. I say 2020s consciously since a 2024 return has now become highly unlikely, but 2026 to 2028 seems doable right now. With the help of SpaceX, NASA will establish a much larger, much more impressive moon base years before Russia and China will have even sent their first habitat module. Let's really hope that this relaxed Chinese-Russian timeline will not lead the US to also adopt a more relaxed attitude towards a return to the moon. It is quite important that the US has the high ground when it comes to a human presence on the moon.
I have the high ground!
Okay, sorry, that one had to be. And apparently Billy Nelson, the new NASA administrator, wants more funding for the human landing system despite China's and Russia's relaxed attitude for their future moon base. So apparently SpaceX, being chosen alone of 3 companies to build the human lander for the Artemis program, America's human return to the moon, has really sent some brutal shockwaves to Washington. The lobbyists are going crazy right now, like, how could this happen? And apparently NASA is also feeling this pressure, and that's probably why now suddenly the funding for the HLS program is all the talk again. We talked about the whole story in detail in our last video, a link in the description. Well anyways, so Nelson testified before the Senate Appropriations Committee, Commerce, Justice and Science Subcommittee, what a really beautiful name, on June 15th about NASA's fiscal year 2022 budget proposal. And of course, the poor guy faced a lot of attacks from senators for NASA's decision to only pick SpaceX as the main contractor to build the moonlander for the Artemis program, in form of this wonderful, magnificent beast here called the Lunar Starship. This baby will offer 1,000 cubic meters of internal pressurized volume and be capable of landing 100 metric tons of cargo to the surface of the moon. So yeah, it is at least 10 times more powerful than the other contenders. When asked why NASA picked SpaceX, Nelson replied that, well, you underfunded us and we didn't have enough money to pick 2. Interestingly, in that hearing Nelson also revealed the pricing of the other moonlanders. While the best moonlander, SpaceX's Starship, came in at a winning bid of $2.9 billion, the national team came in at $5.99 billion. And now get this, Dynetics came in at between $8.5 and $9 billion. Wow! What the hell, Dynetics? We always thought that the national team were the greedy ones, since they consist of Draper, Blue Origin and 2 very well-known old space lobby companies, namely Lockheed and Northrop. But now Dynetics is even above the national team? We have to say that surprises and also shocks us, quite frankly. We held Dynetics in high regard as we always thought their moonlander, Alpaca, is the more interesting one compared to the national team's lobby lander. But now we see this with a bit different eyes. This lander here is certainly not worth 3 times what SpaceX's Starship is worth. Sorry, but that's just way too expensive. You know, someone at Dynetics must have gotten a bit too greedy. So anyways, Nelson is a smart guy and knows that the politicians often consist of corrupt bastards. I meant that they really are very prone to be lobbied from certain interest groups who have very strong ties to old space, namely Lockheed, Northrop and Boeing. And these groups certainly were very unhappy that only SpaceX got the winning bid, of course. So knowing that, he then suggested to the appropriators to introduce a jobs bill that would add more money to the HLS program, and that at least $10 billion would be needed. If he gets that money remains to be seen. Also, Dynetics should really reduce the price if they want to stand any chance of getting chosen as the second contractor. Seriously, Dynetics, what the those guys really watch too much Wall Street.
The point is, ladies and gentlemen, that greed, for lack of a better word, is good. Greed is right. Greed works.
Funny enough, this hearing took place one day before the revelation of China and Russia about their moonbase timeline. So without this knowledge, Nelson said, "I think you're going to see a very aggressive China. I think that's going to become a question for you all as policymakers. What is the value to the United States that we get back to the moon first and get on with this program in preparation to go to Mars?" This guy is smart and he knows how to pull the strings of politicians. Because these guys here don't give a shit about space exploration, make no mistake. They absolutely don't care. But what they do care about is China's rising power, and Nelson knows that. So that's why he insisted on the $10 billion jobs bill for the human landing system. Let's hope that the latest revelation of utter weakness on China's and Russia's part won't take the pressure out. The US must remain aggressive and return to the moon ASAP. At least the Chinese are ambitious with their new Tiangong space station. Which me and Jixuan think that it's a total mistake, by the way. It's funny that the Chinese really make the same mistake as the US by first building a low Earth orbit space station. If they would put all their focus on the moon, they would fare much better long term. But hey, we guess that low Earth orbit space stations are all the rage. This is why their moon-based timeline is so weak. Anyways, so 3 taikonauts were launched on Wednesday, June 16th at 9:22 p.m. EDT and arrived at the core module of the station named Tianhe about 9 hours later. Here we can see them entering the core module from their Shenzhou 12 spacecraft. They will be staying aboard Tianhe for 3 months now, which is quite the impressive stay time since this core module is really not so large, you know. It is 16.6 meters long and has a diameter of 4.2 meters and offers living quarters with an interior volume of only about 50 cubic meters. So a stay time of 3 months is absolutely impressive. Over the next 1.5 years, China is planning to build the entire Tiangong space station. So if the ISS will be decommissioned, then China will be the only nation with a low orbit space station. Which we think is excellent news. Let them circle the Earth, while the US circles the moon and builds a moon base. The moon is the real goal here, not low Earth orbit. That's at least our opinion. Why? Because the moon has valuable resources and enables us to learn how to live on another world, which is really crucial if we ever want to build a Mars base. A moon base is a logical first step on our way to become a multi-planetary species. So China's focus on low Earth orbit, together with the revelation of the really slow timeline for the joint Chinese-Russian moon base, is absolutely excellent news for the US. Now let's hope that Uncle Sam won't mess it up this time. I really have to apologize that we did a voiceover video again this time. We're really sorry, but the other format takes a lot more work and a lot more time to shoot and edit. And so this way, by doing voice-over videos, we can just produce more content, you know. And don't worry, Jishuan will be back. It's just that we cannot do this old format 2 or 3 times a week anymore. We just don't have the time anymore to do that. So we decided to do this voice-over format more often. We hope you forgive us, and we hope you still will continue to watch. So then I would say thanks for your understanding, and on to the future.